I think, this offers tremendous opportunities for lawyers, many of which traditionally are known for not being terrifically tech savvy. And if you really prompt it very accurately to give you kind of a clause by clause feedback, the kind of insights it came back with, I have 20 years of experience. I'm not quite sure I would have come up with this.
It's crazy. This is Legora serving firms. We are going to do this together. We're going to help you create more billable hours was a report that they came out with. And now they're actually saying we're going to go after your customers. Martin, welcome.
Thanks, Ben.
You are Martin Woodward, and you are Global Responsible AI Officer at Randstad. And we're going to get into a lot of interesting things today. Can you briefly explain your background, but also what it means to be a Global Responsible AI Officer?
Yeah, of course. First, Pim, thanks for the invitation. Great to be here. Great to have a conversation together. Global Responsible AI Officer is the name that we've given to basically the person, in my case, sort of at the global level within Randstad, looking after doing AI well. So there's, of course, a huge technological opportunity. There's a huge business opportunity. There's people thinking about the strategy, but there's also people who want to make sure that we do this responsibly, ethically, and increasingly lawfully. I think it's fairly well published that the European Union has its Artificial Intelligence Act, but there are many jurisdictions from China all the way through Asia and even states in the United States that have fairly similar laws. Under many of those pieces of regulation, any AI that you use in the recruitment, selection, HR decision-making kind of sphere, aka, Randstad's core business model, is branded as high risk. So therefore, it's paramount that we get that right. And my team looks after getting that right. We do that with a small central team based out of the Netherlands. And then we have people who more or less have my role in each of the markets and verticals in which we operate.
And your background, you started as a lawyer, then corporate, and then Randstad. Was that the?
Yeah, more or less. So, very in that sense, kind of a traditional path. I was with one of the premier Dutch law firms for over a decade. After about sort of 8 years, I decided, this is probably not where I want to spend the rest of my days. There was a little thing going on at that time called the credit crunch, which meant it wasn't quite opportune to look for a different employer. But 2 years later it was. Then it became a bit of a matter of prestige to at least stay at the firm for a decade. And then swiftly after, I think it was like 10 years and 2 months, I jumped ship to Arcadis, which is a design and engineering consulting firm, also headquartered in the Netherlands, very international operations. And for me, that really felt like homecoming. As my surname already kind of tells you, I don't have a traditional kind of Dutch background. My dad's originally from the UK. My mom grew up outside of the Netherlands. So, I was always used to an international context, whereas a lot of law firms, I would say, are a fairly Dutch environment. Whereas when I moved to Arcadis, all of a sudden, we were at a headquarters with 150 people. And I think at some point they counted over 40 different nationalities. So, for me, that felt like homecoming. All of a sudden, my business language moved from Dutch to English. And what was super interesting is that about sort of 3-4 years into my journey at Arcadis, they really embarked on their digital transformation journey. The whole of the kind of engineering and construction industry was one of the last to digitize, well after the music industry, the banking industry, and so many other industries had already gone before it. And I really jumped on the opportunity to support that process from a legal perspective. And flash forward a few years, that was my ticket for a move across to Randstad. Which is also, a Dutch giant, very well known in the Netherlands and beyond. And super interestingly, when I joined the company and during your first 100 days, you always, look around, see what's coming on the horizon. And there was this little dot appearing on the horizon of the AI Act. And I'm like, ooh, if that's going to, be enacted the way it's currently proposed, this is going to have an impact on this company. And then, I'm about 3 years into this role right now. It's been one of the most interesting rides of my life. And I'm sure it'll be interesting for many, many more years to come.
I bet. It does sound super interesting. I would like to share a short clip from Eric Schmidt on stage. He's the ex-CEO of Google. And I would love to hear your take on what happens here.
Last December, Time magazine selected its Person of the Year for 2025. And this time, it was the architects of artificial intelligence. Interesting.
So what we're hearing here is a big room of Gen Zers, because this is a commencement speech. And they're obviously very opposed to AI. And this was just a few days ago. I think it was May 18th. How do you see this happen within your organization? Do you see resistance against AI?
At the moment, if I'm honest, I don't. I'd seen this clip before. It was over our timelines. I think at various social media for a little while. It surprised me. It may also speak to a certain context in the United States where I think people are, well, on the one hand, seeing sort of the relationship maybe between some of the technology companies in the current administration, and tends to be that younger people are slightly different leaning on the political spectrum than where some of that relationship between these tech companies and the administration might be. So I think that might be a factor. I also think kind of societally, there are some signs that people are having trouble keeping up with the pace with which kind of artificial intelligence has made waves over the last few years. Within sort of the Dutch context, I notice less of this pushback. And for example, if I look at the context of our own company, you really see some of the benefits prevail. One limitation that we have often felt in kind of the recruitment industry is the fact that our recruiters also generally work during office hours, which is when a lot of our talent works as well. And if you want to consult them, for example, about your next shift, you'd have to do that after hours. Now, our talent can work whenever. They can be approached by, for example, an AI chatbot at any given moment when it suits them to sort of discuss their preferences for their next role, even when a recruiter is maybe sort of, would be sleeping perhaps. The AI doesn't sleep. So, in that sense, we see the benefits. And this is just kind of one example. And that's at least where we're currently at. At the same time, when you see this kind of societal pushback, it emphasizes that need to do AI well, to do it responsibly, and to do it in a trustworthy manner. I think Randstad is fairly unique in the sense that its original founder, Frits Goldsmeding, formulated very early on a couple of sort of core values as a company, and where for many companies, like an external consultant comes in and tells you what your values are. I think what made this unique is that they were so embedded in the company for so long, and most people working at Randstad can actually sort of recite them almost. And one of those core values is to trust, and to trust is very easy to shape. When you are someone looking for employment, you walk into a branch office, there is a consultant or a recruiter sitting there, you have that conversation, they go through their Rolodex, they go through the opportunities, and they provide you work. That instantaneously creates that bond of trust between you. But how do you then translate that bond of trust in a digital environment? First, it was sort of, recruiting through a website or contact through email. But of course, increasingly, the matches between our candidates and the jobs that they're seeking and our clients seeking fulfillment of those positions are happening on, digital marketplaces, are enabled by algorithms, are enabled by AI. How do you shape sort of that value of to trust? And that's really where I think, my team plays a crucial role.
Because that is a big challenge.
It's huge.
And how do you tackle that?
Step by step, little by little. But it's about making, I would say, very informed decisions on every step of the way, and make sure, and it's in the case of our team, to get an early seat at the table. We have a big...
What do you mean with that, early seat at the table?
I think there's sort of traditionally, and if you talk with any kind of legal professional, there's always that impression that you are invited to the conversation too late. I think one of the examples here is that sort of our development team that's driving some of our sort of key developments, along the lines as I just described. I have someone from my kind of responsible AI team who is part of that development team for about 50% of their time. And really ensuring, in part, next to some other roles that she has in that context, to make sure that, the right decisions are made at the right time to do this as, responsibly as possible.
Can you talk a little bit about your tech stack? So what tools do you use, and how does it impact your department?
If you look at Randstad as a whole, we're actually not a traditional setup because we're a Google house. So we're one of the, I would say, sort of, limited number of enterprise size customers who are in the Netherlands, at least, who are fully on the Google stack. So that offered us fairly early on tremendous opportunities because Google was fairly aggressive in making its Gemini models available to many of their enterprise customers, including ourselves. And that meant that we had kind of enterprise grade AI available at our fingertips with all of the protections that you'd expect from an enterprise grade AI, aka that models aren't trained on our data, that there's protections for personal data, for confidential information, that we operate on our own sort of tenants, that there's no sort of interference with the outside world, etc. Fairly early on, which allowed for a lot of experimentation and exploration in the broader sense of the word. It also meant, if I kind of translate from what we do as a company to what we do, for example, in the context of a legal team, to really start kind of seeing, okay, where can we see parts of this stack really offer benefits to the way that we work as an extended kind of legal team within Randstad. And that exploration continues to today. I would say a highlight for us has been, for example, the use of Notebook LM. As legal people, you often have to, take huge amounts of information into account in decisions. I mean, if I just look at my own work, a lot of what I do relates to the EU AI Act. Now, that's one piece of legislation. We have an omnibus now, but there's also by now tens, if not hundreds of pieces of guidance. You can also all put those into a notebook and use that as your source to kind of query and make quick, informed decisions about, which way to go. Based on a simple query, but looking through endless stacks of documents. Previously, that would have taken hours or days, and now within seconds, you have a response with citation, so you can look it up in the source materials. And I found that to be a fantastic and super helpful legal tool.
Yeah, and did you? What's interesting is that the amount of apps within an organization are growing exponentially. So we started off with a PC, had about a dozen apps on it, and now I think the average is about 300 to 500, SaaS products that enterprise customers use. And I think with generative AI and the vibe coding, I heard you were part of the vibe coding. Legal vibe coding session.
Yeah. No, I spent a delightful evening a couple of weeks ago with a bunch of friends and colleagues just on a Claude Code hackathon for lawyers. Now, I can't code to save my life. I tried Apple's Swift Playground a couple times, but it failed to capture kind of my imagination. So I'm by no means a coder, but literally half an hour of brainstorming with a little team, an hour of spending some time, between sort of chat, developing our ideas, and then building it in Claude Code, and we had a fully functioning application. And of course, it was a whole bunch of lawyers. So in our work field, we called okay, can we build an app that can classify your AI system under the risk categories of the EU AI Act? And build questionnaires, etc. And within an hour, we had a fully functioning application. And it just blew me away how, a group of people, none of us were technically trained, none of us are developers, were able to really construct something like that in such a short amount of time. So I think, this offers tremendous opportunities for lawyers, many of which traditionally are known for not being terrifically tech savvy, to, onboard this technology to really benefit in our day-to-day work.
Yeah, it's so awesome. Are there any examples already of things that you developed internally using these Google tools?
Yeah, for sure. I think I'm incredibly lucky to have both a general counsel on board in the form of Fiona van Leden, who's really has a tone from the top of looking to adopt these kinds of new technologies, experiment with them, and really explore what they can do for us. And we have a global privacy officer in the form of Wouter Bas van de Vecht, who is, one of those traditional kind of divergers. Like, he will have 100 ideas a minute. He could have been maybe a startup founder in a different life. But between sort of the three of us, I think we've got a very good thing going in the sense of identifying opportunities that are maybe, for example, high on admin but low on added value for us as legal professionals. So a key example is the fact that many people in various legal and compliance functions, risk functions, are often involved when you, for example, onboard a new technology. You go through all these assessments to make sure that from a privacy perspective, an AI perspective, a cybersecurity perspective, a third-party risk perspective, you want to deal with this vendor, that the system is safe, that it meets your internal kind of company standards. This was a process that required a lot of manual labor, a lot of traditional questionnaires that people would have to fill out. And now what we've been able to build, just in a combination of kind of Google AI Studio in combination with Gemini, is an ability to simply upload some files about the product into an application. A workflow runs that now pre-populates this assessment for you, and a little bit like the Dutch tax services do with your tax return. It's all pre-filled for you. You just have to press the OK button.
So there's the human in the loop to check.
There's then the human in the loop, because we wanted very much to keep a level of accountability, because we don't want, product owners to feel absolved from kind of the compliance responsibility of the products that we onboard. But it's a huge time saver, and more importantly, because of course we extensively sort of A/B tested this with sort of the original assessments that we performed for certain technology that we onboarded previously, and now having it pre-filled by AI. Generally, the answers are much more extensive, much more actionable, reflect the actual risks much more, and are more accurate.
So quality is up, time is down.
Exactly. I mean, this is a real traditional win-win. I mean, a lot of people didn't feel like completing these kinds of assessments. They'd quickly do it, exceptions here or there, but, normally people would find them quite a nuisance and would do them between their first and second cups of coffee quickly in the morning, and then go about their day.
Yeah.
Whereas, of course, an AI is patient and will just, copy from all the documents the information that it needs. So, we've been able to do this with some of the entry level assessments at the moment, and we're looking to kind of grow this as the year progresses.
So this is in the context of automation, so making things more efficient. Do we also already see innovation within Randstad because of all the AI? So this is a very complicated question to ask. Like, what is the impact of the usage of these tools if you compare the way you work now with, let's say, 2 years ago? How is it different?
If you look at sort of the way that, for example, as a legal team, we now work, I wouldn't go as far as kind of like night and day, but there's always kind of that sparring partner available. There's always that opportunity to sense check your ideas. There's always a way to kind of like generate new ideas. And, I still find it sort of like helpful to think about sort of your AI as this sort of junior co-worker. And I would say that many AIs also from, out of the box standard, already often at a level where on many legal queries, they're at least sort of equivalent of a junior lawyer, and sometimes, remarkably insightful. I had to review a very detailed contract about sort of 2 weeks ago. And if you really prompt it very accurately to give you kind of a clause by clause feedback, the kind of insights it came back with, I'm like, I have 20 years of experience. I'm not quite sure I would have come up with this. So in that sense, very much as this sort of, what shall I say, co-pilot, this augmentational role, I see a huge difference already. I do see at the same time, hallucinations are a real thing, even in sort of very closed kind of RAG-based systems like Notebook LM, the other day, you think that the fact that you really point it towards the sources from which it needs to retrieve its answers will increase accuracy dramatically, and often it does, but it's still worth checking the sources, because even in that context, you can sometimes have a wrong answer, or it combines, because the power of AI is sort of grabbing all these different pieces of information, combining it into sort of the whole answer.
Because that's such a problem, especially because the quality is increasing so much that, before it was like 50-50. So you would always check, and you'd find, problems, and you would fix them, and then it would feel really good that you checked it. But now, like, it's maybe 95% correct. So 1 out of 20, you'll find something.
Yeah.
So how do you get people to find the discipline to keep checking?
I think training. I think that's the only way. It's helpful as well to there's a few ways of approaching this. We've created dedicated fora within our team to exchange best practices, to exchange use case, to see what people are doing, what kind of playbooks people are building to feed as input to some of these systems, etc. And that's been terrifically helpful also to point at things that maybe haven't gone right or haven't worked for whatever reason. And another aspect that we really try to make as many people aware of our biases and our own awareness of our own automation bias. As humans, you're so tended to believe whatever kind of the computer, in the widest sense of the word, spits out at you and believe it as accurate. And I think just actually making people aware of the fact that they have that bias already often triggers them to sort of review, reassess, etc. Now, does that mean nothing goes wrong? No, obviously not. But I do think that it creates this awareness for people to check and check again. Also because we're all in a profession where, accuracy matter. In a legal context, 7 out of 10 is often not quite good enough. So, and this is the one thing that I find very tricky about sort of the AI adoption cycle, especially in a legal community, especially among kind of younger generations, because, I've still, and this is Grandpa speaking, had the benefit of sort of a traditional education, 10 years in a big law firm, spent my first couple of years at Arcadis working for a GC who was also very high on kind of demanding excellence and accuracy. So it was kind of like drilled into me and to also indeed check and recheck your sources, etc. Yeah. But that also meant that I've over time developed a little bit of a critical insight that, probably again, in 95% of the cases, I'm able to spot and maybe not even pinpoint 100%, but I can feel when something's off. Yeah. And how do you, as sort of someone who's sort of coming up through the ranks now, just completed their legal degree, how do you still kind of develop that sense of, something might be off here, when you've never had to kind of work in practice and develop that sense of accuracy, that, ability to distinguish whether something's sort of right or wrong. And I think this is one of the big challenges that as a society will face, at least in this kind of transitionary period, depending on which way we go with AI, and how we can sort of embed kind of young people into our workforces and make them as skilled and as successful as some of us may have been.
Yeah, and in that similar direction, how do you look at outsourcing? It seems like a weird segue, but it's not, because if you give enough trust to the AI system, then at a certain point, you can actually say, well, someone who doesn't have a legal background could also do legal work, or maybe the whole term legal becomes vague, and what is still legal work if you're, asking the system to do it for you. Do you see any outsourcing towards the business more now because of Gen AI or other forms of AI?
I would say not yet, but I do see sort of our path in getting there. We're currently looking at some sort of dedicated solutions to help us with part of our contract review flows. And there you see an element that will enable also people outside the legal function potentially to take a look at it. At the same time, my personal conviction is that some of these systems aren't quite there yet. But we've of course seen tremendous steps forward just, since ChatGPT was launched in November 2022. If you can sort of compare those systems to where we are today, that's already a massive leap forward. Having said that, in and of itself, the current transformer architecture that underlies all of these large language models, because it's a statistical word or even next token predictor, there will always be that element of creativity. There will always be, even if your sort of whole statistical range is 99% of the times it points one way, but there's always going to be that 1% that points the other way. And I think that's where there will, at least for now, I foresee an existing role for legal professionals in that context, because as long as we're working on within this current paradigm, inaccuracies will always be present. It's what makes, it's a feature of AI as well. It's what makes it creative, but it also means it can sometimes suddenly turn right where you were supposed to go left.
How about neurosymbolic AI? So the combination of the old school deterministic, rule-based AI, and making that work with generative AI and getting the best of both worlds. Do you believe in that direction?
I believe that a lot more can be done indeed with traditional kind of, machine learning models, deterministic models than we might currently be exploring. Not everything has to be kind of a shot at an answer. Some can also just be, what should I say, in clear flows that are, completely predictable and have predictable outcomes. I think for certain types of legal work, that may actually be the way to go. At the same time, what makes Gen AI, of course, unique is that ability to engage with natural language, right? And that's the language that legal professionals speak, which is also why I think, the legal profession is going to be very suited to make the journey with AI very successful. I mean, as a profession, we're so used to expressing ourselves clearly and accurately with much nuance in natural language. And that's, of course, the way we communicate now with these computer systems. So, in and of itself, I can see the benefits there. But I would say any element of generative AI introduces a level of uncertainty. Now, for certain work processes, that may be completely fine. I was at a conference the other day where, someone asked the audience, who has ever, commenced legal proceedings over an NDA? Like, all hands remain down. So it's like, okay, if we're fine, apparently, concluding this document, but not ever actually taking anyone to court over it, is that a document that, within, very shortly could, be concluded between, your AI and the AI of the sort of your partners. So, I think that's true for different sections of kind of legal work going forward, that you make kind of those risk assessments. And I think AIs will probably be involved in many, if not all of them, but whether they do the end-to-end will really depend on kind of your risk appetite, and that may vary as well from company to company.
Are firms affected by this, law firms? And specifically for you, are you sending less or more work to firms now that you have AI?
To the first part of your question, I think insufficiently so. I would be surprised with sort of the rapid improvements in AI that we've seen over the past 3.5 years. If we go another 3.5 years, I'd be greatly surprised if the business models of traditional law firm, time materials, would still sort of largely remain intact, because you have to become, I think, clever. I think customers, including ourselves, are increasingly asking for, work that was previously maybe, research intensive to be done with AI. And I think we're also increasingly looking for firms that are willing to go on this journey with us. We've been lucky that in some of the IT, technology, privacy, AI related work, we've partnered with an Amsterdam-based law firm, Project More, and I found them to be very willing, for example, to think alongside us. So, to give you one very concrete example, We were looking to develop some standard terms, at least when procuring high-risk AI systems or AI systems that under the, when the AI Act rules come into force will be branded as high risk. And because, many IT contracts have these longer terms, 3-5 years sometimes, we'd like vendors to already kind of commit to the standards that we know that they need to adopt halfway through the life cycle. And we went out to a bunch of firms and they came back with a very compelling offer in the sense that they recognize that this is probably an ask that they're going to get from a much wider installment or a much wider sort of group within their client base, and said, okay, we'll offer these at a low fixed price point that nowhere near reflected the actual time that they spent on creating this, but in the knowledge that this would be sort of a standard template that they'd be able to kind of productize to share with many more of their clients. They really used it as a marketing tool as well, organized webinars around it. And that's a really kind of a completely novel way of thinking that I hadn't come across in many different law firms. And I thought it was terrific that they wanted to partner with us to develop that. And I think, you'll have to start seeing more and more of that from law firms because, the amount of work that in due course we'll be able to pick up in-house will be larger. There are already plenty of stories of sort of lawyers across the board who have suddenly very informed clients coming to them, who'd briefed their situation and talked about it with or conversed about it with their AI. We're also, going to be able to upscale ourselves. We're going to be able to do much more of the work in-house in due course. And again, I'm seeing a little bit of a tipping point. 2 years ago, it was obvious that LLMs weren't quite good enough. Now you're getting to that place where I think they might be getting there fairly soon. And the combination of a lot of first round review, for example, of contracts by AI, followed maybe at a later stage by some human intervention, I think is probably what we're going to see at broad scale fairly soon. And we're going to demand that of our external counsel as well. Contract reviews that take 8-9 hours to complete will, I think, soon be, unacceptable.
I hear and see a lot of fear on the firm side, but I also hear, especially the bigger firms, that they don't really feel the pain at all. Mm-hmm. Do you agree with that statement?
I don't work there, but I don't see many signs of them feeling any pain just yet. And of course, they've maybe been through this rodeo. People like, for example, Richard Susskind years ago were publishing books that really predicted, a lot of legal work to go to these alternative legal service providers. And in the UK, they've been able to make some ground, but in many other jurisdictions, they haven't. In the Netherlands, they have a slice of the market, but not a huge one compared to a traditional law firm. So maybe to some degrees, they think, it's just the next big wave. At the same time, the AI has really democratized a lot of what was sort of a legal monopoly or legal professionals monopoly. And I think, many clients, especially I would say sort of smaller companies that may not have budgets for external law firms as much as larger enterprises do, they will, with the help of AI, do a lot of more of their legal work themselves. And I think, you're going to see this across the board going forward. So I'd be very surprised if this wave does not have a profound influence on law firms. And I think they'd actually have to start becoming much more entrepreneurial. In essence, the theory is that, each partner at a law firm kind of operates their own shop and goes out and acquires new cases, etc. But, especially at large law firms, a lot comes to them, either just through the reputation of the firm, in some cases also through, personal relationships, networks, etc. But like that real entrepreneurialism that you see in many other sectors is often absent. And I think we'll have to see much more of that with traditional law firms. They'd really have to, explain and demonstrate, why they are kind of uniquely skilled to still pick up that work. And I think a lot of the commodity work will be able to be picked up in-house through, AI support.
I think it's so interesting to see because if you look at it from like an outside perspective, the parties in the market with the best cards are the ones that are not grabbing the market, because these law firms have the best data, they have the best people, they know exactly how everything works. But then there's a 25-year-old who starts Ligora. Mm-hmm. and totally becomes like world dominator and challenges Harvey, and they've raised 500 or 600 million, and Harvey I think is $1 billion now total, with crazy valuations.
Staggering.
It's I mean they're going for 55 times the 55 multiple on their annual recurring revenue. And if you take the current valuation and multiply it by 5, which is approximately what these investors are expecting back when they invest at this stage of the company, then you get to a valuation which is very close to what Wolters Kluwer and relics like the incumbents are worth. So basically, the market is saying that these market leaders will become the new incumbents within 3 to 5 years. What is your take on that?
I don't think that I'd be willing to sort of, necessarily put my money in a dedicated legal AI provider just yet. I'm very curious to see how this market is going to play out. I say this against the backdrop of sort of the recent announcements, especially by, Anthropic, and the availability of sort of legal skills for some of their popular products, fairly soon followed by Microsoft making similar announcements about their co-pilot's legal abilities. You've seen Codex in sort of the OpenAI side. I mean, some of the other big AI labs will probably soon follow with similar announcements. I mean, I think all of them have identified the legal market as a key market to play. They've, of course, already got an into many enterprises, etc. And, at least for now, come at a heavily subsidized price. I mean, many of these, I think both on sort of the Microsoft and Google side for enterprise customers, they're making currently their state-of-the-art AI available at no additional cost. Now, that's of course not going to stay that way, but it does mean that there's a high threshold to suddenly say, okay, now I'm also going to fork out a couple of €100 a month per dedicated user for a dedicated legal AI product. Now, of course, there's some benefits still to sort of the key product, most notably that often you can select sort of the specific jurisdiction. I mean, if I ask Gemini a legal question, then, I have to guess what jurisdiction it's using to sort of answer that legal question. And most likely it'll be an Anglo-Saxon legal which I would say basis rather than, for example, Dutch law, which the sources online, aka represented in the training data, of course, very low. And I think this is a key advantage still for many legal and dedicated providers, as well as the ability to connect to very specific legal sources for case law, jurisprudence, legal journals, etc. But this is going to change relatively quickly. I mean, I've already heard stories of big publishers exposing their content through MCP servers. And, if you have a subscription to certain journals, they'll also make a digital copy available, exposed to you through their MCP servers that then sort of your EDU version of a ChatGPT or Claude can simply use that to as part of its context. And so if that really starts happening at scale, then I'm not sure that these dedicated legal AIs will be successful in future. And I think, the combination of these big AIs, chatbots, etc., that we all have access to in combination with some dedicated sources, and whether that's through, the skills-based solution that Anthropic is choosing, or through, contextualizing it other way by, connecting to certain MCP servers, agentifying it maybe, could be a different route. But, given the power, given the investment in some of these big AI labs, I'd be surprised if they don't come and be victorious in the end.
Patrick I don't know how to pronounce his name. Probably Forker, but maybe he's Canadian, and you should say Forquet. I don't know, but he's the chief revenue officer at Legora, and he came out and said something about how they position themselves in the market, and this is the first time that they've done this publicly. So I would like to share that clip with you and hear what you think about that.
But legal tech generally is a $40 billion market. So then if you look at us, you look at our competitive set valuation, that sort of doesn't add up. But then if you look at sort of legal services more broadly, that's $1 trillion market. And certainly there's a bunch of work within that's not work that's done by law firms, for example, but it's more sort of like rote, repeatable, document extraction type of work. And that's where we see ourselves really sort of playing in the long term, is not just the legal tech market, but there's an element of the services market as well, where, there's a high degree of application for Legora.
I totally get that.
And I totally don't get that. It's crazy. This is Legora serving firms. We are going to do this together. We're going to help you create more billable hours, was a report that they came out with. And now they're actually saying, we're going to go after your customers.
Yeah, I was also initially, when I heard this, very surprised that they were so open, so frank about it, and at the same time not surprised. There is indeed a small population of the market that are traditional law firms, but their client base and even the legal teams within their client base are generally much more extensive by comparison. I'd imagine, therefore, sort of going after an enterprise market in the widest sense of the word, not just legal teams within enterprises, is a huge opportunity for players like Legora, for example. I get there. I wouldn't call it like a pivot, but their addition to their business model, because I think it's a huge market. It will really empower us. The even more interesting element of this is that there's a suggestion in this that there's also kind of like a democratization of this legal knowledge that they're going to be facilitating, aka you can see that maybe there'll be a Legora professional subscription that comes at a certain rate for law firms and in-house legal teams and maybe enterprise customers, but also an almost free tier, maybe advertisement sponsored or links to actual law firms sponsored version of Legora, whereby consumers can just ask their legal questions. And, we already noted earlier in this conversation that AIs are rapidly improving in quality. For many different cases, that might end up with correct legal advice to, just everybody out in the street, more or less, in most of the cases. And in most cases, that will be fine because they're just, looking to say, okay, how can I get back to my landlord on this specific query that I have, or the damage that isn't being repaired. How I just bought this online, it's broken, the web shop isn't willing to accept it back. What do I do now? Like those kind of typical queries. And there's a suggestion in what he's saying is that they might eventually also go, bypass law firms, bypass the legal teams, and go kind of straight to consumer for general legal advice.
Yeah. If I were a firm, I'd find a way to partner with Legora. And they also have Legora and Harvey and all the other ones out there. And you see this shift happening because they also have client-facing portals where you can actually white label their technology and sell. And I think the most important thing for firms is to keep the relationship with the clients, and also shift towards new target audiences, because the NRC Handelsblad released a few weeks ago that the civil cases have doubled over the last, if you compare it with like last year, which is showing that people are basically going to court because they feel that they can be a lawyer themselves. And I think that's absolutely amazing. And there's a huge, huge opportunity. So, as you said, firms should become way more entrepreneurial and see where the value is in the market.
And I think what you mentioned around sort of that relationship, I think, that is what makes us uniquely human, those relationships that we have, whether we value working with some people, whether, they can check their egos at the door and just be pleasant people to deal with, that they really support you, that they think alongside you, that they understand their business. And so many sort of lawyers always claim to do so. And very few actually do. An outside counsel's ability to make you look good with sort of the support and advice that they're given, that they're just sort of pleasant people to deal with, that they have time, that they're available. I think a lot of those kind of human values will come back. I was speaking to one of the leading AI ethicists in the Netherlands a few weeks ago, and we also bond over the fact that we're both dads of young twins, and both of us were recently faced with what kind of school do we send our kids. And very interestingly, as someone like him who's really followed this kind of evolution, if not revolution, for a longer period even than I have, was saying, okay, he's choosing to sort of send his kids to a Montessori style school because, they'll really learn more general kind of life skills. It'll be less about kind of just simply adopting curriculum, but much more about sort of the human skills, the interpersonal skills, the relational skills. And ultimately both him and ourselves have now chosen to send our kids to a Montessori schools, because we think that may be in part what the future will ask of our children in the professional world, because that might be a differentiator when a lot of access to knowledge is available freely for everyone at their fingertips.
Maybe last question about that, because it triggers me a little bit, because I hear that a lot of the people in the tech industry prohibit their children from using technological products. Are you similar in that way? Are you wary of that?
100%. Yeah. I mean, we've pride ourselves on having raised our kids so far without screens. I'm an avid rugby fan, so it's been unavoidable that the kids have seen the odd rugby game here or there. But other than that, we don't plant them in front of an iPad, to keep them entertained. It makes for hard work at times, but more and more studies are coming out about sort of the addictive effects, about the developmental downsides, but also just damage to eyesight, things like that, to expose your kids to screens at young ages. So we've taken that to heart. I'm not sure how long we'll be able to keep this going, and of course, you also want to, at the right moment in time, make them ready to function in this society, and that comes with interacting with screens and information that's bombarded at you. But at the same time, part of me also has a hope that by the time my kids are early teens, that as a world we've made up our minds much more clearly on what to do in that relationship between social media and kids, for example, because I think increasingly there we're seeing more and more evidence of damaging effect, especially on kind of young children, their self-esteem, etc., through exposure to social media. I kind of hope that by the time my kids reach that age, that we deal with it like, drinking and smoking, that we say, okay, there's just a minimum age before kids can get exposed to that. So, in that sense, I'm a little bit alike to some of the big tech CEOs, etc.
Yeah, and this is also one of the reasons that I invited you in the studio, because I love doing this, in person. It's so much better than looking at a screen.
100%.
Thank you so much for coming, Martin Woodward.
Thank you.